That's obviously no requirement here.
Yeah, and maybe this is the wrong week to ask it, 'cause when you get to talking about how to integrate science and faith.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
A Briefer History of Time, and at the end of that he gets done talking about the Big Bang Theory and all the strange sounding things they've essentially proven are correct at the beginning of time, and he said if all of that happens, that doesn't really leave room for a creator.
Oh, see, Stephen Hawking also says, I've got a quote from him in the Teaching Atlas that says something to the effect of, the only way this could have happened was with a creator.
Really?
Yeah. That's taken from...
Have to look that one up.
There's one in there. But he lives big, you've read it. Yeah, he lives big, opening. But essentially he leaves it open for God as like the Big Bang causer. You know. So...
Beyond the singular.
Yeah. Which
What was that recently?
where he said that, I don't know. I mean, Brief History of Time is the one he wrote for normal people, right? Like non-science people.
Well, I'm even a step down from that. This is a Briefer History of Time. It's on CD,
on audio tape, the comic book.
It's his condensed version of the big book.
Yeah, I read the Brief History of Time when I was on vacation for some light reading. But he really, I thought, tried to engage normal people in that. Yeah. And I think that's where he saw it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he was trying to draw broad outlines. But as I was listening to some of this stuff about, matter, antimatter, and neutrinos and stuff, I said, it's easier to believe God created all this stuff than to believe that all these strange and unusual concepts. Yeah, and I don't know.
Francis Collins has a great one. He's the guy, the Christian who is a scientist, who is the head of the Human Genome Project.
Yeah.
And in his and in his book he said the thing you got to understand is that every scientist is a maverick. They all want to disprove everything else we know true to be wrong. They all want to do that. So if a scientist could disprove evolutionary theory, they would be trumpeting it, and they're not defending it. They want to break it down so they can be the next Einstein or whatever. So I thought that was a great point, because I grew up thinking that scientists were like this coven of people putting out this false story trying to get us.
So does that lend credibility to the theory if nobody has ever disproven it yet? Because none has ever disproven it?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like those guys feel pretty sure that evolution is the way things happened. And I go, my whole thing is just to prove that there's no conflict there. If that's how they did happen, there's no conflict with Scripture.
Well, I mean, the other thing is when you talk about science, you're talking about things that can be replicated and done over.
Right. And history is stuff that happened once.
Right.
Not reproducible facts.
It's the little.
You got some light reading there?
I got some light reading today. Species to species that no one has ever been able to replicate.
Right. That's a big thing.
And so you say, well, and the other, science doesn't deal with things like love and these intangible.
Right. And meaning.
Right. It tells how, not
what it means, or So science is, I think, woefully inadequate to answering life's big questions. But the obverse is true. Whenever we try and address spirituality to how a light bulb works, you're like, this is not our domain. Our domain is meaning, significance, not electromagnetism. So
you guys were just talking about the science aspect of it. In the past, people approach not only science but theology in just the mental realm and the intellectual movement. But do you think there will be a pendulum shift to just seeing it in the emotional realm, as far as because of the postmodern trends that are here? Do you think there'll be more of a balance as far as how we approach?
There'll be a lot of mind-body stuff that infiltrates science over the next 100 years because of the effect of postmodernism on pop culture in America. But I don't know. I think that ultimately, if we could live long enough, we'd prove that spirituality and science overlap eventually. Eventually. You know, I mean, when you get into quantum physics, when you get into things like, you know, light being both a particle and a wave simultaneously, when you realize that the human body is made up of 90% space, and you start reading all these things and learn all this stuff, then you go like, there's just tons of stuff we don't know. That in many ways we're just describing it in spiritual terms because our science isn't good enough yet, or whatever. But I think we're, you know, like a couple million years away from that.
Yeah. Wasn't it Einstein who said, a little science estranges a man from God, a lot of science brings him back?
I don't know.
I think I've heard
But
that.
I hope he
Sounds
said
good.
that.
Yeah.
If it wasn't him, it's going to be
I
me
like
next
that
Sunday.
So my question is, if science is telling us that the Earth is 6 billion years old, and Genesis says 6,000 years, do we argue about that, or is there room to say it doesn't matter? I mean, are there gaps in the Bible history that we could say?
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, you really got to pick. It's either one or the other. If we're going to read Genesis 1 literally, and Genesis, you know, if we're going to read anything before the flood and add those years up and try and quantify those years, then we're going to have to say that science is wrong. But Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are all have such a mythic quality to them, and are written way later that it's really hard to make the case that you can date the Earth off those chapters. So in my mind, I go, maybe the Earth is 16 billion years old. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's not a big deal whether or not it's 6,000 years old or 10,000 or whatever, because I don't think that's what 1, 2, and 3 are about. Especially 1. I really don't think 1 is like a thing. You know, and Augustine never thought Genesis 1 should be taken literally. Irenaeus never thought it should be taken literally as like descriptions of a 6-day literal creation. You know, Origen never thought so. Aquinas never thought so. You really don't even get that. That belief doesn't even become a belief until Darwin. And when Darwin says it's billions of years old, or I think Darwin was only thinking millions at that point, but whatever, that's when the church really sort of rose up and said, no, and anchored around that scripture.
So the early church fathers then kept the story as a story.
Yeah, they said, I mean, Augustine's quote is the most famous, and he basically says, maybe it's literal, maybe it's not, but it doesn't really matter. That's not the point.
Yeah.
So I think that's the safest way to go, is go.
Because they were still in it. I mean, they were still in that storytelling mode.
Yeah, well, Augustine's now moving more Greek, more rational. He's past that.
But Origen was like 200 AD, right?
Yeah, earlier maybe. Origen and Irenaeus are early.
Early.
Yeah, but I mean, like they're way better sources than like, you know, Hal Lindsey, right? like you know, it seems like the reaction of the church to Darwin was one of fear. And so we got scared about what it might mean because, of course, a lot of scientists were saying this means, you know, God's not real or whatever. And so the church got afraid that is what it meant. And we rallied around a couple of key scripture verses. But it doesn't feel good, you know. And did you know, John just told me today that the Anglican Church has issued an official apology to Charles Darwin.
Really?
This week,
Yeah, this week.
on the 150th anniversary of his writing The Origin of the Species.
That's a trip.
What did they apologize for?
Misunderstanding is the operative word.
Yeah.
That they didn't raise
Misunderstanding and then jumping to conclusions,
They didn't-
and
they
not
didn't give-
investigating.
Yeah, they didn't give him the floor. They didn't hear him out. They maligned him, you know. So,
Well, back to the date thing. Once they start writing things down, then I assume we're using scientific techniques to see how old the stuff is that it was written on, you know, papyrus or clay tablets or whatever.
yeah. But it's not exact. I mean, and then a lot of that stuff is from the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran. A lot of that stuff is recent, where we find stuff that, you find fragments of stuff that you can date it to about this or that. We feel better about most of the First Testament than the New Testament because the Jews they really cared about that stuff. But it's other stuff like the Enuma Elish, and the New Testament fragments that it's this big, it's this big Babylonian creation poem that basically Genesis 1 is like a fix. It's a fix of it. And it dates back. We have clay tablets, so they date to like 1800, give or take.